The air in the subterranean arteries of the city was thick, a gritty blend of ozone, hot metal, and the frantic perspiration of a million rushing lives. It was a place where sound was simply noise, where faces blurred, and humanity existed only as kinetic energy pushing toward the next destination. Against this brutal backdrop, 5 days a week, sat Dominic Reyes. Dominic was the antithesis of the rushing crowd. Seated on a low, folding stool in the echoing concourse connecting the 7 train to the A, he was an island of stillness. He was perhaps 35, though the subtle lines around his mouth suggested a life lived more deeply than most. He wore simple, dark clothes, and his hands, large and scarred from years of dedication, rested lightly on the polished ebony fretboard of his acoustic guitar. Dark glasses covered eyes that had not seen the light of the subway ceiling, or any ceiling, since he was 14. He did not play covers of pop songs. He played music that sounded ancient and new simultaneously. Intricate Spanish arpeggios, wandering jazz inversions, and deeply rhythmic folk melodies that seemed to tap into the very pulse of the earth beneath the tracks. His guitar case lay open at his feet, lined with soft velvet, containing a modest collection of dollar bills and shimmering coins. For Dominic, the music was not about money. It was about translation. The blindness had taken his sight but had gifted him an auditory empathy few could possess. He didn't need to see the commuters to know their burdens. He heard it in the rushed, uneven cadence of their footsteps, the sharp exhales, the almost imperceptible friction of their hurried passing. He played not to entertain, but to interrupt. He played, changing lives one note at a time, though he rarely saw the change himself. Justin. The unraveling thread. Justin existed in perpetual motion. He was a young partner at a demanding financial consultancy firm, and his life was quantified by billable hours and the speed with which he could navigate Manhattan's underground maze. He felt important because he was exhausted. One Tuesday in late November, Justin was moving at terminal velocity, phone pressed to his ear, arguing in sharp, whispered monosyllables with an assistant about a misplaced file crucial for an 8 a.m. pitch. The usual sounds, the screech of brakes, the tinny burst of commuter headphones, were merely static he filtered out. Then, Dominic plucked a chord. It wasn't loud, but it was perfectly placed. It arrived just as Justin slammed through the turnstile and hit the open concourse. Dominic was playing something that sounded like controlled panic, a dizzying cascade of notes that flew up the neck of the guitar, challenging the listener to keep pace, only to resolve abruptly into a deep, sustained, resonant hum. Justin stopped dead. He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring blankly at the concrete pillar beside him. The file, the pitch, the demanding voice on the line, it all vanished. The music was a mirror. It didn't just sound frantic. It sounded exactly like the inside of his own skull. He hadn't realized how quickly he was moving, not physically, but emotionally, accelerating towards a burnout he was too busy to schedule. Dominic's fingers kept dancing. The melody shifted again, becoming fluid, almost liquid, like water finding its path around a stone. It suggested that speed and resistance were optional. Justin lowered his phone. He walked toward the music, the momentum of his high-pressure life finally broken. He noticed Dominic's dark glasses, the slight bend in his posture, the absolute focus of his hands. He stayed for 10 minutes. The assistant eventually hung up, defeated. When Dominic ended the piece with a quiet, reverberating bass note, Justin felt a tremor of true, unadulterated awareness. The kind that hits when you realize you've been holding your breath for years. He reached into his coat pocket, not for $1, but for his folding wallet. He dropped a crisp $20 bill into the case, not as charity, but as payment for an emergency session in existential therapy. Justin didn't run to catch the A train that morning. He walked slowly, found a bench, and typed a professional, courteous email, not to his assistant, but to his boss. He was taking the next 2 weeks off, effective immediately. He had lost the crucial file, but he had found a crucial perspective. He might lose the promotion, but he knew, with sudden certainty, that he wouldn't lose himself. Edith. The silent comfort. For Edith, the subway was a tunnel leading inevitably to loss. She was 72, frail but fiercely independent, and she rode the Uptown Express every Thursday to visit her husband, Richard. Richard wasn't in a nursing home. He was buried upstate, and the long journey every week was her ritual of devotion and grief. The noise of the subway system magnified her emptiness. The rush of cold air was a constant reminder of the cold fact of his absence. One Thursday, the train was delayed. Edith stood near the platform edge, clutching a worn leather bag containing a fresh bouquet of lavender, her shoulders slumped with the weight of loneliness. As she shuffled toward the delayed train track, she passed Dominic. He had tuned his guitar slightly lower that day, the notes possessing a deep, melancholy resonance, like the sigh of old stone. He was playing a piece she recognized vaguely, something from the distant past, perhaps a Baroque air, or maybe just a deeply soulful blues. It was slow, measured, and profoundly respectful of silence. The music didn't make her feel sad. It made her feel seen in her sadness. Edith stopped and leaned against a tiled wall, closing her eyes. Richard had always played classical guitar, badly, but with overwhelming joy. The notes Dominic played were technically perfect, yet they carried the same emotional truth. It was the sound of enduring love, even when the object of that love was gone. Dominic sensed her presence. He felt the concentration of stillness near him, a weight of focused attention that differed from the usual hurried curiosity. He didn't interrupt the melody, but he subtly altered its structure, introducing a variation that lifted the harmony slightly, moving from regret to remembrance. It was a musical conversation held without a single word. He was acknowledging her pain but offering a steady hand to help her walk through it. A wave of warmth passed through Edith. She hadn't wept since the funeral, afraid that if she started, she wouldn't stop. But here, in the noise-choked tunnel, surrounded by strangers, the music granted her the permission she needed. A single silent tear traced a path down her cheek, leaving a clean track in the subway grime. When the music finished, Edith opened her eyes. She felt lighter, less brittle. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but Dominic's notes had woven a strength into its fabric. She carefully opened her leather bag and withdrew a crisp, iron $10 bill. Money she had saved specifically for the bouquet. She preferred that the guitarist have it. As she dropped it into the case, Dominic dipped his head, a gesture of silent thanks. "Thank you, dear," she whispered, her voice rough. "You brought him back for a minute." Dominic did not respond verbally, but as her slow, shuffling footsteps began to move away, he started a simple, beautiful countermelody that followed her, a gentle, invisible escort to the train. Edith boarded her train, the lavender clutched to her chest. The trip felt shorter, the destination less final. She had found a place where her sorrow was not burdensome, but musical. The unseen symphony. Weeks passed, turning into months. The concourse where Dominic played remained a blur of hurry and anonymity. But for a few dozen people every week, Dominic's music had created a silent fellowship. People who had stood still and felt the noise drain out of their souls. Dominic himself rarely thought about the impact. He simply played the chord that felt right for the moment, trusting his sonic map of the corridor. He knew when a rush hour peaked, when despair walked by, and when a rare moment of light filtered down from the street level. One rainy afternoon in late February, Dominic was deep into a complex, meditative piece, the notes falling like heavy droplets, when he heard a familiar set of footsteps approach, then hesitate. It was Justin. Justin looked different. His expensive suit was still immaculate, but his posture was relaxed. The tension around his eyes was gone. He walked with determination, but no longer with panic. He had discovered that the world did not end if you disconnected from your phone for 2 hours. He had even picked up an amateur woodworking hobby, realizing he missed working with his hands. Justin had stopped not to listen, but to drop off a small wrapped gift, a leather guitar strap he'd found in a specialty shop, a token of his continuing gratitude. He knelt by the case, placing the object next to the coins. As he rose, he noticed an elderly woman struggling to lift a small, heavy suitcase onto the bench next to the wall. It was Edith. She was returning from her weekly pilgrimage, the exhaustion visible in the tremor of her hands. In his life before Dominic, Justin would have rushed past, offering a fleeting internal apology for his inability to stop. Now, the music playing in the foreground, a theme of patient, steady rhythm, held him fast. Justin walked over to Edith. "Ma'am, let me get that for you," he offered, his voice surprisingly gentle and devoid of the corporate huskiness he usually employed. Edith looked up, startled. "Oh, thank you, young man. It's heavier than it looks." Justin lifted the suitcase easily and placed it on the bench. As he smiled, he realized that the simple act of genuine, unhurried help felt better than closing any business deal. "Heavy commute?" he asked. Edith settled onto the bench, catching her breath. "A long one. But it's always worth it." She gestured toward Dominic with a slight nod of her head. "And I have the advantage of hearing Richard's favorite concerto on the way home." Justin glanced at the guitarist, then back at Edith. "That's funny. I always think he's playing exactly what I need to hear at that moment. He stopped me from making a terrible mistake a few months back." Edith smiled, a genuine radiating warmth that smoothed the wrinkles around her eyes. "He has an extraordinary gift, doesn't he? He hears things the rest of us are too busy to notice." They sat together on the bench for a few minutes, two strangers connected not by proximity or shared history, but by the vibrational energy of a blind man's guitar. They were part of the congregation of the stopped. Dominic, playing behind his dark glasses, couldn't see the transfer of the suitcase, the shared, comfortable silence, or the connection that bloomed between the architect and the grieving widow. But he heard it. He heard the precise quality of Justin's footsteps, no longer erratic, but grounded. He heard the difference in the way Edith settled onto the bench, the sound of relief, not defeat. And he heard the subtle rhythm of their breath sinking as they listened to his slow, steady cadence. He was the catalyst, the unseen conductor of a much larger, silent symphony of human connection unfolding in the sterile underbelly of the city. As the commuter flow began to thin, Dominic reached the final, echoing chord of his set. He placed the guitar carefully back in its case, savoring the silence that followed the music. A silence that felt cleaner, imbued with the residue of 100 small, unseen transformations. He didn't need sight to know that the world above ground was still rushing, still spinning toward chaos. But in this small, damp concourse, through the resonant whisper of nylon strings, he knew he had given a few souls the strength to slow down, to breathe, and to finally see the path forward, one quiet note at a time. The guitar strap lay beside the coins, a tactile confirmation that the music had traveled far beyond the open case and into the lives of the strangers he played for. And that, Dominic knew, was the true measure of his work. That will be all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. Goodbye.